Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Rita Kiki Edozie, Professor of International Relations and Global Governance at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Dr. Edozie has served as the university's inaugural Deval Patrick Endowed Chair for Political, Economic, and Social Innovation and was the interim dean and associate dean of the John W. McCormack School of Policy and Global Studies until the school was merged into the College of Liberal Arts in 2023. Receiving her PhD in politics from New York City's New School for Social Research in 1999, Dr. Edozie has been a teacher, scholar, and an academic administrator of graduate education and undergraduate studies for over 20 years. Prior to UMass Boston, she was a professor of international relations at Michigan State University's James Madison College of Public and International Affairs and the director of African American and African Studies at the university's College of Arts and Letters. She was also the deputy director of the Institute of African Studies at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. She is an accomplished scholar and author of several academic books and scholarly articles on global development, comparative democratization, African affairs, and race identity. Some of Dr. Edozie's books include The African Union's Africa, New Pan-African Initiatives in Global Governance, and Pan-Africa Rising, The Cultural Political Economy of Nigeria's Afri-capitalism and South Africa's Ubuntu Business. Her most recent book, Africa's New Global Politics, Regionalism and International Relations, with Moses Khisa, Lynn Rayner Publishers, received Choice Magazine's 2022 rating as highly recommended reading. So welcome, Dr. Edozie. It's so great to see you today and be able to talk to you.
It's wonderful being here, Ashley. It's been such a long time, but it's great to see you again.
Yes, it's wonderful to see you. Dr. Edozie, I took your classes in undergrad at James Madison College, but then you were also chair of the African American and African Studies program at Michigan State when I was getting my PhD there. So you have been very influential on my career and trajectory. So thank you for that.
I'm so proud of what you've become. Look at you.
Thank you. So I want to get started by kind of asking how you got into Black studies as a field. You have this background in political affairs and relations, and you taught in James Madison. But what really drew you to Black studies as a field?
Yeah. Two things. One, my lived experience. I consider myself an international Black immigrant from Nigeria, UK, and my city of immigration was Brooklyn, New York. Many, many, many years ago. I don't want to age either of us, but sort of living there, way back then as a new sort of immigrant, I was exposed to Black culture in Brooklyn, Pan-African culture. In really intriguing ways. And it drew me to read, the works of John Henrik Clarke. I remember that, Cheikh Diop, and I just personally read them, out of interest to sort of understand my own identity, and just was fascinated about how these foundational scholars of Black studies were writing about the Black experience in ways that, drew me in more, closely. I went on to pursue a PhD in political science. However, my alignment with Africana or Black studies was always, the study of Africa. But I always approached the study of Africa, from a diasporic Pan-African, solidarity way. I remember my PhD in international politics and African affairs, but I was looking at the African Union, for example, and its Pan-African initiatives, its diaspora initiatives, its a desire to connect with Black people all over the world. That's the research that interested me the most. And so Michigan State University was probably my fourth or third university that I taught at, but I was really privileged um, to meet the great Geneva Smitherman at the time, and may his soul rest in peace, Curtis Stokes, who passed a few days ago. But these were building blocks for me to take a role in the institutionalization of Black studies at Michigan State University by drawing me to lead the African American and African Studies program there at the time. And from there, it was just really great because it got me into the study of African American and African studies in not just research ways in terms of ideas, but the institutionalization of the study in building programs and departments and curricula around Black studies. I spent I think about 6 years or 5 years doing that at Michigan State University, and it was the most momentous period of my life. And even though I went on to become a dean of policy and international affairs school, um, the sort of ethnic studies or the urban studies focus of policy studies stays connected. And so I find myself in a city in Boston, living in a Black city in Roxbury, very similar to Detroit, which I sought out when I lived in Lansing, in ways that kept me close to the lived experience of Black people and therefore the study of Blackness.
So I have a follow-up question.
Mhm.
What was, because there was James Madison College, which I've been able to talk to a couple people about on the podcast, Kyle and Dr. Jackson. But there's James Madison, and then there was AAAS. What was it like teaching the kinds of courses that you did at James Madison and being in a place that one was it was rooted in a lot of the foundational texts of the country. All the first years we all had to read all of the founding documents, but your courses specifically, right, were focused on Africa and issues related to diasporic concerns.
Yeah.
How was that in James Madison for you?
Yeah. So yeah, no, I think difficult, but always a beautiful struggle to struggle for inclusion and representation and change and transformation. And so yeah, I found myself and back then, now we're talking about 20 years ago when I first arrived there, and I think you were one of my first students.
If it was 20 years ago, yeah, I would have
Yeah, one of our students. And so we had a little at the time, Black representation in terms of the
been.
student
Mhm.
population, you know, and we had few. I think I was the first um, tenured Black woman at James Madison College. Um, so we had few in terms of representation of Black faculty. And so, it wasn't represented in the curriculum either. So there I, found myself um, designing courses, even my international relations courses, or you were in social policy, I think,
It was
policy courses, designing courses that reflected my lived experience, which was a Black experience. And I did come into a lot of you know, tensions, with the faculty around, including this kind of change and transformation. However, having said that, I think the impetus of the tense conversations we would have always sort of produced positively a change. And that school went on to establish a whole new major in comparative cultures and politics, because of, faculty like me who thought we should diversify the curriculum and have more inclusive, sort of Black studies
Mhm.
presentations and texts in our curricula. So we did that. The social policy, the international relations school, it was tough for international relations to include themes of race and identity, but we showed them the way on how we could, include that. There's a whole literature of international, initiatives on race, ethnicity, uh,
Mhm.
African diaspora studies and international relations. I mean, I used to, tell them about W. E. B. Du Bois and how he was an internationalist, not just an Africanist or um, African American studies, but he wrote,
Mhm.
scholarship on, the international world through, a racial perspective, and that needed to be included in our curricula. And so lots of great conversations and dialogues. And so, I am really sort of satisfied to say that, the dialogue for inclusion mattered, and it resulted in change at the school. And so I'm really, sort of fascinated to see all the changes in the school since I left. But I think it's a better place. There's much more diverse representation in the curriculum now.
Yeah, I know that when I started in international relations and then I added social relations and policy because
Yeah,
there wasn't any Blackness at first in international relations. And I
exactly.
think by the time I graduated is when they started the comparative, major.
Okay.
I couldn't add that one, I didn't
Too
have
late
time.
for you.
But,
Right.
yeah, I know that taking your classes and I think I might have done a senior seminar with you, but taking your classes, especially on the IR side, was really the only representation of non-Euro-centered ideas that happened. So I really appreciated that because it was like, this is
And
a lot.
and it's so sad that that was only 20 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So that in 2005, that's where we were.
Yeah. So, especially when in thinking about the various roles that you have had, from faculty to dean to chair and program director to faculty, what keeps you committed to having Black studies still be a central part of your academic identity?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, the I think it was a 5 year appointment as the director of African American and African Studies was a real eye opener for me. It gave me so many insights of the success of the African American Studies movement, the ways in which programs had become departments, and even majors had moved from just undergraduates to graduate programs to PhD programs. We at Michigan State at the time were one of the few PhD programs.
Mhm.
And when you're doing a PhD program in African American and African studies, you have the opportunity to, focus on, research, around, Black peoples, all over the world, right? And so the program, leading the program, gave me that, insight into the Black Studies movement and its success. I mean, the recruitment of, so many students to that program was actually also contested, because there was a belief, among those outside of the program that, you know, our students wouldn't get jobs. That the why couldn't Black studies be sort of subsumed under English studies or humanities, or why did it need to be its own separate department? And so there was a non-recognition of the Black studies struggle, right? Which had, emerged from, the civil rights study. Um,
Mhm.
and I remember telling my colleagues, so sort of, in English, for example, who said, you could, bring Black studies under English. And I said, well, I mean, um, English is the study of English. The Black studies, is a whole, different kind of study. It could be the study of Spanish English, Spanish Black people, Spanish Black people.
Mhm.
Right? It's not an English study. It includes an English study, but it's not, exclusively an English study. The study of Africa is not, a study of English. And so, we had to have a lot of, sort of arguments of what Black studies is, its importance, its impact. We did a lot of research to show what other schools and universities were doing, and bringing that, sort of research to, my colleagues was eye opening for them as well. And so, we sort of realized that, Black studies had, had its day in court and, had come to the fore, and that even at Michigan State University, it needed to move from just being a program to its own department.
Mhm.
And so, I'm sorry, I think the question was, I might be going off.
No, you're fine. Like, the question was what keeps you committed, but I think that this is a really important
Yeah,
portion of that,
yeah,
right? Especially because, um, one, I I haven't kept up with everybody who was there when I was there during your, term as our chair, but the ones I have kept up with, like, we all got jobs. So,
we
that
did.
was, like, we all did get jobs.
We had about a 100%, job
Mhm.
placement.
Yeah, like, we were getting jobs, and I think that, um, one of the things that the program did and that you did as chair is, like, we had our core Black studies courses, and we were firmly grounded in that, and then we all were also trained in multiple different types of methods, in other disciplines that also shows, like, the multidisciplinarity of Black
Absolutely,
studies, and
absolutely.
that I think that that was a real benefit, right, to us to be able to be trained in these other areas in addition to getting those Black studies foundation and grounding and understanding, like, the types of methods that have been used in the field of Black studies, as well as these are the types of methods that if your research is focused in education, like, you should know what people with PhDs in education expect to see.
Absolutely. And it
Yeah.
is that interdisciplinarity.
Mhm.
So, sort of, which meant that, Black studies was inclusive. So for someone like me who was a political scientist or, sort of policy, buff or international relations, saw a home in Black studies, right? Because, it's interdisciplinary. And that was the beauty. And I remember trying to argue with my colleagues in English at the time, who sort of wanted to take over the program, to say, I enjoy collaboration with English studies, but Black studies. The beauty of ours is that we are having these same conversations with history, with education, with political
Mhm.
science. Even at Michigan State University, I was so motivated by connecting students, PhD students, potential PhD students, with who would do Black studies in business, um, in sciences, in the natural sciences. There would be faculty in those disciplines who were doing studies about Black issues in their discipline, and saw this connection and was so happy to have that connection, to train our
Mhm.
students in this kind of partnered interdisciplinary way. Really exciting time for me at Michigan State University in that program.
Well, it was definitely one, like, greatly influential to my trajectory. But I like, and I don't know if this was just that particular program, if it was the mix of people and faculty we got to work with, but like that was literally like some of the best time of my life was that program, and being able to not just have these conversations with other students in the cohort, and especially with my cohort, like we would go out after class every week and talk about what happened in class.
Mhm.
But being able to work with faculty from so many different areas
Yeah,
was very influential in thinking about, like, okay, here are my questions, here are the ideas, here are the things I'm interested in. Now, what's going to be most helpful to respond to this question in a way that keeps Black people at the
yeah.
center?
Yeah, yeah. No, fantastic. And I remember, Ashley, even your study, your dissertation study, and I can't remember the specifics, but what I do remember is coming away once from when you really, had started to design your study, to say, I have learned something about, because you were doing something on Black pedagogies and in hip hop.
Yeah. Mhm.
Fantastic, study, right? But for a political scientist like me, I would never have been able to enjoy, those kinds of research interests and insights, right? And so, my motivation. Maybe the next question is going to be what are the challenges, but to tell you the truth, I came away from the Michigan State University's program with a high saying, look, we've established some foundations, um, and, this can only go, all the way up. But, about 1 or 2 years over here in Boston, I began to see the the movement against Black studies and DEI programs and critical race theory,
Mhm.
in ways that I'm like, what? We just started. And so that's the regret part, which we could talk about later. But the excitement part is that this was a movement that was, you know, still moving, evolving, and making impact, on knowledge, about Black peoples in relation to the societies that they lived in magnificent ways.
Thank you. That was, you said so much in that answer, and so much I wanna follow up on, and also, like, thinking, "Okay, let's think about the questions that I also wanna ask," but, like, following up on that. So you started to mention some of, like, the challenges. Do you wanna speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the challenge is that it's almost as if the movement, gains success, and then there's the backlash.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is almost like how what we're experiencing in American politics currently, where we had Obama, and we said, "Wow, America has turned a corner, in terms of inclusion and representation." Um, but then there's a backlash, right? With the MAGA movement and the presidency that came after, and the backlash is such that it wants to undo, that very, you know, um, inclusive, diversity, that we achieved, to make America a much more beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
place. So that's happening in Black Studies. I'm glad that the Michigan State University Black Studies became a department finally, and I'm sure that the programs. I'm not sure if they've reestablished the PhD program, but they have a much more expansive undergraduate studies program, which
Mm-hmm.
is important. The faculty, full faculty representation doing Black Studies, or they named their department African American and African Studies, I think, is still
Mm-hmm.
the
I think
department.
it still is, yes.
Okay. So, that I think is an achievement, and I'm very happy about it. Um, but, across the nation, you're finding that Black Studies programs, whether they're departments, programs, or just initiatives, are under attack. They're
Mm-hmm.
under attack. Either they're underfunded, either they are being de-established, either they're being merged into larger ethnic studies where they become sort of invisible, and that saddens me because it's almost we just got started. We haven't established, I mean, the complaints by the institutions that do this, or the policymakers, they say, well, you're not getting enough enrollments. That is true in some areas, it's not true in others. And they're saying that these are funding issues. We can't fund all ethnic. I think that's also a big mistake. And then a part of it is just ideological. It's part of the backlash against DEI, and I'm not sure why critical race theory was, isolated and selected as a boogeyman to criticize by the Republican right wing, but it has made a lot of damage where, you know, great, poets and Black studies scholars like Toni Morrison is on a hit list for a banned book, right?
Yeah.
And it's being used in an ad, a political ad, to say that her work frightens white children, right? And this is happening, from 2017 onwards to date, right? And so I ask myself, what is going on? How could we have achieved so much success, and yet, you know, there's all this backlash and tensions and banning, of black studies? I think it gives me a lot of concern.
Do you think so? One of the conversations that has happened on the podcast, but also like inside conversations. What do you think, or do you think there is an impact of the institutionalization of Black studies on its influence and ability to impact in communities? So like with Black studies as a study, the study of Blackness, being, predating when Black studies departments actually started. how do you see that institutionalization and having to um, speak to, or respond to, incorporate, take into consideration the demands of the institution,
Mm,
as maybe impacting the field or the study of Black people from Black perspectives itself?
yeah. Yeah. Well, you know that, since you're a Black Studies scholar and graduate yourself, that one of the assumptions and premises of, Black study is community engagement, right? It's one
Mhm,
of the few disciplines, that does that, right? That, because we emerge from community struggle, and the civil rights, in our curricula, we ensure that our study is um, aligned and in many ways, continues to be partnered with community engagement. Another beauty for me of leading that program at Michigan State, whereas we were in Lansing, we were always in Detroit. Uh,
mhm,
Look at Detroit in the news, in the national presidential campaign news, and I get to say here in Boston, hey, that's my city that I know, and that I know, its history and its current, transformations and its engagements. And because we studied that, always going to
mhm,
Detroit, to especially we had a program with the Charles Wright Museum, because of our community mission in Black Studies. Now, why was that so important? I mean, look at how much I learned. I'm sure you learned, by that kind of engagement. But, that engagement is nationwide and global, quite frankly. In Black Studies is methodologically a post-positivist study, which it's a post-structural study. It's a study that believes that the knowledge is created and discovered to liberate. Right?
mhm,
There's a moral and political dimension to knowledge. Knowledge is established to solve problems and bring peace to the world, right? We're not afraid, to incorporate that in our mission, that subjectivity, you know.
mhm,
And so it's so important in Black studies. We were in the forefront of participatory methodologies, whereas we would participate as scholars, in our research subjects in beautiful, liberating ways. And so, the connection is that why we need Black Studies programs. We have one here at University of Massachusetts Boston, is to continue to produce knowledge that you know positively impacts to improve our societies. Black people all over the world, one of the features of Black people all over the world, economically at least, is questions of inequality and
mhm,
um, you know a continuous struggle for economic development, right? And so to what extent does the knowledge that we produce help us, reduce inequality and improve, the circumstances of Black people all over the world. And so the importance of Black studies and the community factor and the community engagement angle is just critical, Ashley. I can't say more about it. I often, I'm a political junkie as well as a political scientist. Those two things are sort of separate, but I'm following this election, and I'm just going to use an example of the National Association of Journalists interview with former President Trump. It was about a month ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago, where he raised the unfortunate specter of the blackness of Kamala Harris. Um, and Kamala has been nice about it ever since. All she says is, "We all need to work together.
Mhm.
We're going to engage that," and that's probably correct as a politician. But what I would have said is, you know, former President Trump, you need a DEI course. You need a DEI course or a Black Studies course to understand um, the multiplicity of Blackness, to understand how, of course, just because Kamala is mixed, that is, a big feature of, Black demographics. To understand that Kamala's father, who is Jamaican, was Jamaican heritage, is black, right? To understand that, having a black father or single black parent in America, at least, by your own laws, canonizes you as black. All these things. There's just so much, ignorance around, black people and their histories and their circumstances. Yet these same people, are pushing the anti-blackness and the de-establishment of affirmative action and DEI programs. Yet we all need them.
Mhm.
So that's my sort of landing on the impact question that you asked me. It is that Black Studies programs. That's where you learn about you know these dimensions of blackness, and that's good for Black people, but it's also good for American society.
Thank you. I think that kind of integrated some of the 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 question I was going to ask about um pedagogy. But is there anything else you'd like to say about how your work as a teacher, especially with you stepping back into classrooms now, how that's informed by Black studies?
And so exactly, and so my even my studies on Africa. Sometimes I mean, there's a tension and debate within Black studies to the extent of, you know, the scope of Black studies. Does it, focus on the Black experience in the Americas, or, does it include, the study of Africa? And how, the study of Africa in America, as I taught you guys, has its own sort of racial undertones, right?
Yeah.
That many are not also aware of. I always try to reconcile, and connect those studies in a way that now, I'm really pleased to see that African diaspora studies has, sort of blossomed, right? The beauty for me even to meet Black Cubans or Black Hondurans who speak a language that I have been learned in Nigeria, but have never been to those places. And so, how those cultures retained African culture even in the diaspora, and that happens here in the U.S. as well. In terms of even the roots of so our music, our
Mhm.
the so all these connections, right? In the study of Black people globally, is something that I have been able to incorporate in my current study of and teaching of international relations. That's why when you read my brief bio, and included race and ethnicity. And so I do, wherever I go or wherever I, teach, currently teaching in Boston. I like teaching in big cities where there are urban environments, and whether you have urban environments, you have issues of race and ethnicity and inequality, and you have beautiful black bottom,
Mhm.
cities and neighborhoods like the one I live in, Nubian Square. Nubian Square, I've been studying recently how Dudley Square, it used to be called Dudley Square, just about 2 years ago, um, the movement to change the name to Nubian Square to reflect the blackness of the city, as opposed to Dudley, who was seen as a colonialist.
Mhm.
These kinds of restorative histories, come into policy studies and global studies in really intricate ways. And so that's the beauty of what I'm doing now, and how I marvel at, wow, I'm able to bring in all that experience, into the classroom in really enriching ways. And so that excites me, absolutely.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I didn't know that about the change in the name.
Yeah,
That that's so
yeah,
cool. So, last 2 questions.
okay.
So, if we think about, like, the past of Black studies in the field and where we've been up until now, are there things are there particular challenges or things that haven't been as strong or done in are there things you would critique, right, about how the field has operated in the past?
Well, I'm going to break out the question of gender, and as I again, just a few weeks ago, we've been embroiled in this debate about, on the one hand, masculinity and these campaigns, but on the other hand, black men,
Mhm,
right? And supporting Kamala. And I found it sort of so exciting. And I said, look, we had those debates, um, back at Michigan State University in the African American and African Studies program. The gender, black gender. Sometimes we call them wars. Tensions. Conflicts.
mhm,
Um, at Michigan State University, I don't know how we've worked that out. It's an all women sort of department with a focus on Black women's studies now, um, and so that's a thing. That's a way to look at it, right? I don't know whether or not that alienates men, though. Black men. In terms of, is it inclusive enough for them to be part of that Black study? So is that the way to go? We're UMass Boston, these are questions we're also debating. The question becomes, how are we representing Black masculinity? Are we, as Black peoples, inclusive of Black LGBTQ, and gender. I just think we have to work on it. We have to continue to work on it. Yeah, I just remember being taught by, not taught, but at least being inspired and mentored by, of course, Mama G, Geneva Smitherman, who talks about the Black family, right?
mhm.
And if you keep it in the family, you understand everybody's role, and we all work together, right? I am inspired by that vision myself, because being from Nigeria, the African sort of conception of African feminism is always inclusive of, everybody's role, right? So my hope is that, in Black studies, we can work out those questions so that we don't get to a presidential election where we're saying Black men are not going to vote for a Black woman.
Thank you. So, what excites you most about the future? Like, where do you think the field should go?
Well, I'm really excited about what you're doing, Ashley, and I want to put it in perspective. So, as a result of your initiatives, you have applied for a Mellon grant with your idea about establishing this podcast, and you got it. And you're doing it right now. You're actually, running a podcast where you're capturing the voices and the experiences on an array of experiences of, the Black experience in Black studies. I think, were I to be writing about, the future of Black studies, I would be including you as a case study of how to do it, right? How to keep the achievements, that we have occurred over the years, to archive them into this podcast, but also to share them with so many, millions, of listeners in critical ways. So I think that you are the future in that case. I would like to see more departments established and stabilized. So we've established these departments, but some of them are not stabilized. They're under attack, or they're disorganized and dysfunctional because they're underfunded. Um, I would really like to see that change. How that changes, more of us need to come together in this work, and myself included. I have often said, "Oh, well, I've moved on to, policy and global studies issues now. I can't focus on that." But maybe that's a bit of a mistake. The opportunities I had to lead Black studies institutions here that I missed because I was doing other things. But I think that those of us who are experienced in this field, need to sustain it, right? So we need to get back into it because a lot of our institutions are crumbling too early. We just started, so we have to save them, and continue that movement forward to build them for the next generation.
Thank you. I think that point about sustainability is so important, and thinking about what it means to have that memory, that like historical knowledge and action is so necessary as we do combat all of the attacks that are happening against the field. So thank you. That's a great reminder. I also just want to put, like, I really appreciate what you said about the podcast. So thank you so much for that. And I definitely want to make sure that my podcast partner, John Drabinsky, is shouted out. Cause
Um,
yeah, his that the podcast portion, I'm not gonna lie, was him, because it makes me nervous to talk to people that I've cited in the past. But I really appreciate it, and it's
that
been a
goes to
wonderful
show you're
experience.
like a veteran. You're great. You should have a show, a permanent show.
We'll see. We definitely have talked about, future iterations
There you
the of the podcast. So it won't end with the grant, but
go.
I think these conversations have been so informative, both for me and him, and just thinking about like what that means for like the work we do in our classrooms and the research we're engaged in offline.
Absolutely.
And for like, it's so interesting to hear what so many other people are doing in the ways that, like you said, like Black studies is everywhere, and it's
Absolutely.
being done in different ways, but it's still Black studies, and having those examples is so integral, especially right now with all of the attacks that are happening. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, Ashley, it's been great talking with you.
it has been so
Yes,
good. Thank
yes.
you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You're
Is there
welcome. I
is
look
there
forward
anything
to,
you wanna
well, no, I look forward to reconnecting physically, maybe. Now you're Maryland, you're on the East Coast, not too far.
Yeah.
So hopefully we get to see again. But no, thank you. I think this is a great initiative. I'm looking forward to the broadcast of the podcast. Is that the language it's used?
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay.
Yeah, yep, I will follow up with you about the dates, but thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed this conversation today.
So have I. Thank you, Ashley. Take
Thanks.
care.